Mayor Joines.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody's doing this beautiful spring day. It's finally quit raining. But it's always my pleasure to be with this group, and thank you for getting us together. I'm representing the third leg of the Triad cities here this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me. Let me add my plug for regionalism. I'm certainly a huge supporter of that, and I appreciate my colleagues, Mayor Knight, Mayor Smothers, mentioning that as well. There's an old African proverb that says that if you can get enough spider webs together, you can tie down a lion. Now clearly, if we get enough spider webs together from the Triad, we can tie down the line of rebuilding our economy, which I think we've got to do. We've got to speak with one voice. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Winston-Salem this afternoon. Well, I'm on the morning. I guess the morning just went by so quickly that we're still here. I haven't had lunch, that's true. I believe Winston-Salem is on solid ground as we're moving our economy to one based on knowledge industry. We've made good progress. We've had to do that. And we're trying to position ourselves certainly to be competitive in the global marketplace, and I'll talk a little bit about that. However, I'll say that we are, I don't have to tell you this, that we are still in the midst of a jobless recovery. We are coming out of that, but we're not seeing the jobs being added back to our economy. I think a lot of times our manufacturers and others are working extra hours and making that little extra effort without adding bodies to their employment. But we're beginning to see some improvement. Our unemployment rate is still around 9.4%. We're a full point below the state and a full point below the rest of the Triad. So we're very pleased with that. Even though the rate is very high, we're glad that we're a little bit below the others there. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've had two large growing medical centers that have stayed very healthy during the recession piece. I was in D.C. not long ago and picked up a copy of a study that the U.S. Conference of Mayors have done on our local metro areas. And they're predicting in that study that it'll be 2013 before Winston-Salem reaches pre-recession levels. So it's another year and a half before we're back there. And the other areas we're a little bit later than that in our area. So we're pleased that we're moving in the right direction, but it's going to be a while. There's about 233,000 people working in Forsyth County today, with all types of all the way from self-employment to part-time to military jobs, things of that nature. We're a city of 230,000 people according to the U.S. Census. We believe they're about 5,000 low in their count, but we've done all we can to convince them of that, so we'll settle in at 230. The good news is we're still 1,600 more people than Durham, so I can continue to kid my good friend Bill Bell that we're number 4 in the state, right behind them there, right ahead of them there. We are very fortunate that due to the hard work of the city council and the city staff and others, that we've had a good robust growth of our tax base over the past 10 years, growing at about 5% annually. Now, we'll say that came to a screeching halt in about 2008, 2009, and 10, as was alluded to earlier. But the fact that we've had that good solid rate growth in our tax base is we've been able to keep our tax rates very stable. Matter of fact, if you look at our rate in 2004, it was 49.5 cents. This year it's 46.7 per hundred. Now you're saying, Mayor, you're playing games with me because you did a revaluation in there, didn't you? I said, yeah, we did. But I'll say this to you. We reduced our tax rate when we did our revaluation, but there were counties and cities across the state of North Carolina that could not reduce the rate even with a revaluation because of the economy. So it's a testimony to the hard work of our staff to keep our budget in line there. This budget that we're right in the midst of right now is a tough one. We've had tough ones, seems like, mayors for the last 3 years. But we've done some good cutting and good belt tightening, and our budget, we believe, will get adopted with no tax increase, no fee increases, and no reduction in services. And in fact, we believe we'll be able to give a small pay increase to our employees that we haven't been able to do for the last 3 years. Again, it's a testimony to the staff and the hard work, and the fact that we're beginning to see a little bit of uptick in our sales tax revenues and a little bit of our property tax. Big if out there, of course. The big if is the state of North Carolina. You know, the state's got a huge deficit that they're dealing with, and I'm always a little bit nervous. We all don't sleep well until the legislature finishes their work and go home. But when the states sometimes start closing their budget gaps, they look at some of the state shared revenues, as they call it. We call it our revenue, but they call it state shared. It was in 2002 that the governor easily impounded $8 million from Winston-Salem and even more from Greensboro and from High Point to balance the budget at that point. But we're getting the message from the leadership in the House and Senate that they're not going to do that this year, but we never know until it's all done. So if there is a tax increase, it will be brought to you by the good folks in Raleigh there. But let's talk a little bit about good news. Last year was a heck of a good year for Winston-Salem, given the economy that we're in. We started the year off, or fairly early in the year, with a $100 million project in the Piedmont Triad Research Park. As you know, we're developing the largest urban research park in the country, tied into a downtown area, some of the most cutting-edge research in the country going on right there. We're growing body parts over there and developing new drugs and things of that nature. But we're working with a company out of Baltimore, Wexford, to convert an old tobacco warehouse into a $100 million project of research labs and space for new company spin-off, as well as Wake Forest University Baptist Medical Center will be in there. The city's going to redo the streetscape in that area of the park, $6.2 million in that area, and build a green park around the old Bailey power plant. For some of you who drive into Winston, you can recognize that by the two large smokestacks. Sort of an icon for Winston-Salem. It says RJR on it. We're going to preserve that and actually turn that building into a retail use at some point and work this park around it, and it'll uplight the smokestack, so it'll be a nice addition to that. A little bit later on in the year, we saw ISP Sports merging with IMG College out of New York, keeping ISP, that company, headquartered in Winston-Salem, and added about 30 jobs to our city. We then worked hard with Governor Perdue into protecting about 800 jobs at our Pepsi-Cola National Service Center, which is located there in Winston-Salem. We were nervous because PepsiCo made an announcement they were going to consolidate from 7 of these call centers down to 4. And so we wanted to make sure that Winston-Salem was one of the 4. And the governor and I called on Indira Nooyi up in New York back in the winter, made the pitch. We were able to keep them in Winston-Salem and actually add 200 jobs to it. So that was a good news for us. A little bit later on, we worked with a company called NS Aviation, which is going to be doing maintenance work at our Smith Reynolds Airport on large aircraft. It was a great partnership with the state as well as the Golden Leaf Foundation. We've been nervous about Wells Fargo. You know, Wells Fargo acquired Wachovia, and of course with that you're very nervous. We made a business case to John Stump, the CEO for Wells Fargo, demonstrating why it made good business sense to keep the jobs in Winston-Salem and actually grow jobs. Well, he heard us, I think, and has kept the job level of about 3,000 in Winston, and has actually added 150 new jobs to our tax base, to our workforce, and Linda was a beneficiary of that in her building with some of that in the trust department there. Capped the year off, as Mayor Knight mentioned, with the recruitment of Caterpillar, a huge manufacturing facility that they're going to invest $426 million and create about 500 jobs in this manufacturing facility. Very high-end competition for us. They started out looking at 15 sites in 9 different states. We narrowed it down. They narrowed it down to 3, us, Montgomery, Alabama, and Spartanburg, South Carolina. We thought we had a good proposal on the table, but found out we were number 3. It's not a good place to be in the economic development competition. We redid our proposal a little bit, got the Golden Leaf involved and improved it, and we're successful in doing that. Now, people will say to me, well, Mayor, you say your budget is tight. How are you able to do these economic development deals? We're going to put about $13 million into the Caterpillar deal. I tell them it's like this. Caterpillar's going to pay their own way. They pay us the taxes on that $426 million. We give them back a piece of that over a 10-year period. The good news is, over that same 10-year period that we're paying them $13 million, the city will net $5 million from Caterpillar from the get-go. So we didn't have that $5 million before they came, and we wouldn't have it if they hadn't agreed to come here. So it's a good way of structuring these projects. It's sort of a pay-as-you-go way. Matter of fact, no question that we did a huge deal with Dell. You're familiar with that. Dell was here for about 6 years and closed their operation last year. And people try to get a little criticized for us for doing that. But let me offer you a deal and see if you would take it. If someone came to you today and said, okay, we're going to come into your city, we're going to invest about $120 million, we're going to hire about 1,400 people for 6 years, and oh, by the way, we're going to close in 6 years, we're going to give you all your money back. Would you do that deal? I would. I'd do it again, and that's exactly what happened with Dell. They came in, they built this $120 million plant that's still there, still paying property taxes. They employed about 1,400 people for 6 years, and when they decided to leave, we had such strong clawback provisions in the contract, they gave us back $26.5 million. So that's the importance of incentives, that you've got to make sure you're protecting yourself. As a matter of fact, the fact that we got some of that Dell repayment back helped us with the recruitment of Caterpillar. Now, what about this year? We're certainly going to stay focused on the 7 areas that we're working on in Winston-Salem to rebuild our economy. Those being financial services with a strong base at Wells Fargo, BB&T, GMAC, and others there. Medical, 2 large growing medical centers in Winston-Salem. Biomedical, I've already alluded to that with a large research park that we have going there, and regenerative medicine with Dr. Atala, who's the kind of the superstar of that. Design, which is a part of our research park, our Center for Design Innovation that will tie into that. Logistics, certainly building on the Piedmont Triad airport and the FedEx hub there is going to be a strong piece of that. Advanced manufacturing with things such as Caterpillar, Honda Jet's a great example of that over at the airport. And then travel and tourism continues to be a strong part of our economy. And then just something that I say, keeping our corporate headquarters happy and growing. You know, I call BB&T regularly, tell them how much I love them, Haynes Brands, Wachovia, GMAC, and others. So trying to keep those happy, and then we're trying to build all that together with a strong, vibrant downtown, because as been alluded to here, we have to be able to attract and retain the young professionals that are really the fuel for these new knowledge-based companies there. This year, I put together, with the City Council's blessing, a committee, citizens, to help us look at our capital needs coming forward. You know, we're like you in your home. Occasionally got to do some work there. We've got about $420-some million of pent-up capital needs. Asked this committee to look at those and come back to us with recommendations on what we might take to the voters in terms of a bond issue for maybe this year or early next year, depending on how the wind's blowing. But we're pleased with that. We've got to get going on some of that. Very pleased that we're making good results in addressing our crime rates in Winston-Salem. Down 11%. Major crimes are from last year. That's following a 3-year trend in declining crime rates. Got a great new aggressive new police chief there that's doing some good innovative work for us. Happy to say that our ballpark has been successful. As you know, that project got in the ditch and we had to come back in and put some additional money into it. A lot of controversy around it, but last year the attendance went from about 140,000 per year to 315,000 last year. Paid all their debts, paid all their payments to the city. The city actually owns it and leases to the team, but their lease payments pays all of our debt costs. So we actually made about $86,000 last year net from the city of Winston-Salem, which is a good deal for the citizens and taxpayers of Winston-Salem. We're beginning to make through, and I'd say this, I want to thank Mayor Knight and Mayor Smothers for supporting us in our efforts on our Beltway. Winston-Salem has had a Beltway on its plans for 30 years just about. We were ready to start building that Beltway about 15 years ago, and we were sued by a group called the Friends of Forsyth. It's an oxymoron. The Friends of Forsyth actually cost the taxpayers of North Carolina $600 million by that lawsuit because it held us up for about 10 years. We now have all the permits and everything ready to go, but the money's not there anymore. And the price of the project has increased now. And so the state has came up with a formula to evaluate these beltways. There are about 25 of them around the country, around the state. When you evaluate Winston-Salem's Beltway on need and benefit, we're number 3 in the state. However, the formula then takes that score and divides it by the total cost of the project. And because this project is so big, when they make that calculation, we drop to number 25, which makes no sense to me. And Mayor Knight and Mayor Smothers agreed with that, and they've worked with us in trying to get the state DOT to look at that formula. So what they're going to do, we believe, is to segment the analysis, which will allow us to be more competitive with that. But we feel good about where Winston-Salem's at and where it's going. Certainly not out of the woods yet. We're still plugging away, chipping away at our economy and moving it towards this knowledge-based one that we believe we'll eventually get to. But thank you for letting me be here today. I look forward to your questions.